Thanks for clicking into the Prezi. It's Jill here. Let's explore how to tackle assignment 2. The key details for this folio are that you will have 1,500 words to write, giving you as many as 1,650 words with the 10%. It's worth 30% of your overall grade and it's due at 5 p.m. on Monday in week 9. This assessment task gives you a chance to analyse assessment strategies and record keeping instruments. And you'll be also evaluating reporting. So we're looking at essentially assessment and reporting of English. For this task, you'll take the Chapter 9 of your Sealy Flint e-text as a starting point. And you'll also notice that Task 1 in particular is very similar to Week 4 in your learning tasks. So we really encourage you to head back into that task if you haven't been in there. Develop your own table, share it with your peers, and talk about some ways that you can further develop each of your tables. When you're ready to start this task, you'll go to the Assignments tab and download the template. In that template you'll find this table, which obviously is very similar to Week 4, except with the addition of a critical evaluation column. The next job is to look at choosing 3 strategies which assess writing and 3 strategies which assess reading. And you'll start to add them to these columns. You'll choose your 6 strategies from Chapter 9 of Sealy Flint, and I'm going to explore an example here. We'll have a look at using portfolios to assess writing. In the first column, you're going to give some brief bullet points about what is being assessed. What things will this strategy tell you about your students' skills and abilities? The second column looks at how the data is collected, and so you'll give very brief details about what ways the data will be collected by the teacher or the students. The third column starts to get a little more detailed. We'd like a little bit of extra in this one, and it's about how the data is used by the teacher. Now remember to focus on how. Don't tell us about the data again, but what will the teacher do when they have that data, and how will it impact on their teaching, planning and analysis. And the final column is your critical evaluation. And this is where we want to see most of the detail for this task. You'll see that it has sections for limitations and benefits, and you'll slot in your ideas in there. When considering this column, we encourage you to think about the principles of assessment. So for an example, repeatability is a principle of assessment, and we want you to think about, is this assessment task, is one of its limitations that it is repeatable or isn't repeatable, and is that a limitation or a benefit? Then you can analyse all 6 assessment strategies based on that principle and think about where the strengths and limitations lie. In this critical evaluation is where we need you to add some citations. We don't need citations in the other 3 columns, but we do need citations in this final column. The task itself, at a pass standard, you can just cite Sealy Flint because you can draw all of your information needed from the Sealy Flint e-text. But if you're aiming for higher than a pass, then you'll need to be reading widely and citing your research through this critical evaluation column. This tip isn't rocket science, but since the final 2 columns will need the most information, we encourage you to adjust the width, giving the critical analysis in particular more space for you to work with. When you're considering your critical evaluation, you might like to think of these questions, which were highlighted by the Grattan Institute. These might help you to consider the value in the assessment strategy that you've chosen to analyse. You can find the full report on the link below, but I also find that these questions align really nicely with the principles of assessment, and I'll talk a bit more about the principles later in the presentation. We understand that it's a fairly limited word count for this task, and there's a few strategies that we have to help you manage this word count. One of them is that you need to use just single words or very brief statements in columns 1 to 3, and for your critical evaluation, very short, not even sentences, but very short phrases in the critical evaluation. We also know that because it's a small word count, we're not expecting a lot of points in those critical evaluations, just enough benefits and limitations to show us you have a clear understanding of the strategy that you're exploring. You can also deduct the 85 words which are in the template from your overall word count. And this table has a suggested word count of 900 words, or about 150 to 160 for each strategy, for each row across your column. Have a chat to your ELA and the rest of your team if you're having trouble cutting back the word count for this task. Now moving on to task 2, you're imagining that you're convincing some of the senior staff in your school about how to implement an assessment approach. So when you're going to tackle task 2, think about the critical evaluation that you've just undertaken and choose one writing assessment strategy and one reading assessment strategy. You're going to write an argument, and this will be in the first person. So I think that X strategy is the best for assessing writing, and these are the reasons why. It needs to be a strategy that's appropriate for all of the children in a primary school from foundation to year 6. And task 2 is the only part of this assignment where you can talk about your understanding of reporting. So it's important that you make your understanding of reporting clear in amongst your argument. Why would this assessment strategy support reporting, and how can it be reported to the interested parties? You need to focus on the benefits of this strategy with a small acknowledgement of the possible limitations. So it is an argument. You want to convince those people listening to you that it's the best strategy possible, and you might acknowledge it by saying, while this strategy is sometimes limited in these ways or in this way, this limitation is far outweighed by the benefits, and you could list those. The premise of this task is that you are making a speech to your peers, to your teaching peers, but you don't need to focus too much on writing it in a speech-like language. So focus on making an argument and making a convincing argument. Do include a kind of a brief introduction and conclusion, but nothing that takes too many words away from your writing, because we want you to really convince us that you understand the assessment strategy and that you can link it to reporting. That's the key idea for this task. When you read through the rubric, you'll see that there are 3 criteria which are presented inside the rubric. Let's take a look at those. To show your understanding of criterion 1, or your understanding of the practice of assessment, we'll be looking for these things. Does task 1 accurately describe the strategies? Have you got your facts straight? Are you aware of the principles of assessment? And can we see these in your critical evaluation. Does task 2 argue affirmatively for a particular strategy, for 2 strategies? And can you explore a variety of forms of assessment? Does it relate specifically to a primary context? I've got a tip here about some ways that you can explore these principles of assessment. There's a text which is cited in week 4, written by Winch and others, and they talk about principles of assessment on page 388. Or you can also look at the Western Australian School Curriculum and Standards Authority page. I've put links to both of these here where you can head off and develop your understanding. We'll be looking at whether you've presented a clear critical evaluation. Are your benefits and limitations accurate, and are they supported with your research? And have you looked at both assessment and reporting? Remember to relate reporting in task 2. And don't overlook the importance of your academic writing, your use of APA referencing and clear editing to allow good punctuation, grammar and spelling. Place importance on proofreading, show that you've got good attention to detail, and make use of those study resources, your tutor and smart thinking, to support your proofreading and your editing of your assessments, your assignments. When you're formatting your work, remember to take on APA standards in your citations and your references. And the rest of these guides are just that. They're just some tips that might help you to give a professional appearance to your assignment. So you can include an APA title page. Task 1 will be already set out from the template that you've downloaded. And you might like to add a section break so that you can change to portrait for the rest of your assignment. There's some instructions on the link in there. You can also use single spacing in task 1 because that table tends to spread across quite a number of pages. So consider making that one nice and simple by single spacing that page. Otherwise, all the standard formatting guides apply, and remember that you can find formatting guidance inside the portal. When you have questions, there are all sorts of places you can go to for help. Your ELA is probably going to be the first stop for a lot of your questions, so post all of your questions about tasks and the content onto your discussion boards. We'll answer via email as well, but it's great if you can put it on the discussion board. That way everyone can benefit from the question and from the answer. And we don't get the same question repeated inside our emails. You can also get help from the student advisors. They're especially good for technical problems, whether it's an issue with your submission or if you're having any trouble with Canvas or things not working properly. You can chat to them via email, live chat, or you can call them. And they're also your go-to for information about academic skills and research writing. You can ask them questions about either how to do those things or how to find out more information. And of course, they're also good for your enrolment questions that you might have. You've probably already talked to them about those things. You might not know about the student coaches, and these are, they're such a fantastic resource. You can chat to them about planning out your time, about developing your study skills, or if you're having trouble engaging in your studies and you're finding that you're struggling, make an appointment with the student coaches and they'll do an online chat with you or a telephone chat. And they'll just help you to map out your time and talk through some strategies to help you with either your engagement or your studies. And so finally, there's Studiosity. And this is our draft review service, which is available inside Canvas. One of the modules is called Studiosity, and they'll get back to you within 24 hours when you submit a draft, and they'll give you some suggestions about ways to further develop your writing. I think that you have 8 submissions each subject for each teaching period, so that's almost 2 for each assignment. Oh, sorry, that is 2 for each assignment. It's almost 3 for each assignment. So you can submit multiple times. Think about getting some drafts done early so that you can send it off to Studiosity. I want to leave you with some tips on ways that students have been tripped up in the past, just to make sure that you keep these in mind when you're developing your assignment. Tip number 1, make sure that you do add reporting into task 2. You're not just convincing your listeners about your assessment strategy, but you're also talking about ways that you'll use it to report to interested parties. Tip number 2, keep an eye on how the data is used on that column. In the past, students have forgotten to make sure that it's ways that teachers utilise the data. They've used another focus in there. So it's going to be listing things that you will see the teachers do once they've analysed the data. They might form their groups with it. They might focus their teaching. They might have specific strategies that they implement based on the data that they've collected. And tip number 3, use the principles of assessment and reporting to help lift up your final critical analysis column. So students at a pass and a credit standard, they will read the research and they will look for ways that the authors have discussed strengths and limitations, and they will directly report that back into the final column. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. That will get you a pass and a credit. If you want to move up to a high distinction, you're going to do the thinking first. So you'll be thinking, what are some of the principles of assessment and reporting? And you'll list these strengths and limitations based on the principles, and then you'll head back to your research and find ways that the authors support your ideas. Having done that thinking first, we'll be able to see whether it's your thinking or whether it's other authors' thinking, and that's one of the ways that we can differentiate that particular part of the task between a pass and a high distinction. Hopefully that's helped you think about ways that you can include extra things in here just to push you up to that high distinction standard and to really show your understanding in this assignment task. I really like how practical this assignment is. It's a chance to explore all of the assessment practices that you will be using as soon as you're entering classrooms. It's a short and sweet one. You find the information, you add it in, and then you've got that tucked away for when you're heading out into the classroom. So good luck with the assignment, and I'm looking forward to seeing how you go with it.